I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
The mandate was delivered, the boldest, most difficult project ever proposed by man. A deadline had been set. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the United States aerospace industry were committed to history's greatest technical effort. America's best minds started research involving almost every field of knowledge. A heavy responsibility was placed on North American Rockwell Corporation. Its space division was to build the Saturn second stage, the adapter to house the lunar module, and the Apollo command and service modules. Thousands of subcontractors, vendors, and suppliers across the United States assisted in the effort. The huge F-1 engines for the Saturn first stage and the J-2 hydrogen-fueled engines for the second and third stages were produced at the Rocketdyne division of North American Rockwell. The J-2 engines were tested at Santa Susana on a special heavy-duty Saturn second stage. The F-1 engines were tested deep in the desert at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Scale models served to check out design concepts, manufacturing ideas. Early in the program, astronauts met in Downey to evaluate design and manufacturing concepts. As soon as possible, unmanned vehicles were tested to prove emergency and recovery systems. Even when a booster went out of control, the launch escape system worked perfectly, saving the spacecraft. Apollo unmanned vehicles and actual spacecraft were flight tested on early Saturn I launch vehicles. Then came the first big ones, Apollo 4, an unmanned spacecraft on the first mammoth Saturn V to be launched. Apollo 6 took an unmanned spacecraft out 13,000 miles and then re-entered the atmosphere at a high velocity to man-rate the Apollo heat shield. With all tests proceeding well, the manufacturing and assembly of spacecraft for manned flights attained high levels of perfection in Downey, California. During all stages of manufacture and checkout, the various crews of astronauts actually tested and accepted their own vehicles. The Saturn II, second stage of the mammoth Saturn V launch vehicle, was manufactured at the Space Division of North American Rockwell in Seal Beach, California. Many new and highly advanced techniques were required to build this liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen propelled booster. Shipped by sea through the Panama Canal to the Michoud facility, the Saturn second stage was transshipped by barge up the Pearl River to NASA's Mississippi Test Facility. Here it demonstrated a 6-minute full duration firing, as it would be required to do in actual flight. All stages of the launch vehicle and modules of the spacecraft met at Kennedy Space Center. The completed vehicle, still without fuel, was transported to the launch site. The first manned Apollo spacecraft, Apollo 7, was launched by the smaller Saturn 1B. Simulating a docking maneuver with a lunar module, astronauts Schirra, Cunningham, and Isley brought the command service module to within a few feet of a target area on the booster. For 10 days, Apollo 7 orbited the Earth, completely evaluating every part and system with a multitude of tests. Still pictures taken during the time continued a program to evaluate from space the total resources of this Earth. Apollo 8, with astronauts Borman, Lovell, and Anders, was the first manned flight of the huge Saturn V launch vehicle. It went into Earth orbit, and when all systems indicated go, a bold decision was made. The spacecraft was started on a trajectory that would take it to the moon and back. Nearing the moon with all systems operating satisfactorily, Mission Control in Houston committed the spacecraft to 10 orbits around the moon. Still photographs, technical motion picture footage, and surveying data were taken. That tense moment will long be remembered when the world waited to hear from Apollo 8 on the far side of the moon. Waited to hear if they'd been able to restart the service module propulsion engine, which would send them safely on the long flight home.
Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, over. Hello, Apollo 8. Loud and clear.
Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus.
That's affirmative. You're the best one to know.
Although Apollo 9 was another 10-day Earth orbital mission, it was by far the most complicated mission ever flown by man in space to that time. Flown by astronauts McDivitt, Scott, and Swikert, this was the first manned spaceflight test of the lunar module and a first flight of a new lighter-weight Saturn second stage. It tested the combined performances of the command service module and the lunar module systems. It was a rugged test of the astronauts' ability to conduct all of the maneuvers required for a manned lunar landing mission. At one point, the lunar module was flown 100 miles away from the command service module. Then it completed a highly successful rendezvous. Apollo 10 was the last step before the actual landing. Every phase of the moon mission was carried out, except an actual touchdown on the lunar surface. The command module with astronaut Young stayed in orbit 60 miles above the moon. The lunar module, piloted by Commander Stafford and astronaut Cernan, carried out a landing approach to within 8 miles above the actual landing site. Then, jettisoning the descent stage, the lunar module used its ascent engine to regain altitude and join up with the command service module. Apollo 11 was the final step to complete President Kennedy's mandate. On the far side of the moon, Eagle, the lunar module, separated and prepared for a descent to the moon. Eagle descends over the Sea of Tranquility. It's upside down for better visibility. There's Boot Hill and Sidewinder, ready for the final approach. The black on the right is the black sky of space. Silhouetted section of a landing leg on the left.
Here, go for landing, over. Roger, understand, go for landing, 3,000 feet. Stop alarm. Roger, 1201 alarm. Where go, same type, where go.
An emergency. Huge boulders on the landing site. Commander Armstrong steers for a clear spot.
Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 30 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. 6, down 1/2. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're going to be busy for a minute.
Man on the moon. Some 6.5 hours later, Armstrong moved out of the hatch and down the ladder.
Getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up. Getting a picture on the TV.
Oh, great.
Easy. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. About to take some of my first pictures here. The limb footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. The decent inches did not leave a crater of any size. It has about 1 foot clearance on the ground. We're essentially on a very level place here. There seems to be no difficulty in moving around as we suspected. It's even perhaps easier than the simulations of 16G that we performed on the ground.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to earth. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, port stage, engine arm has set, proceed.
Reaction control motors, firing in short bursts, maneuvered the Eagle into a trajectory for rendezvous with Columbia, the command module hundreds of miles away. In parking orbit, coming around the far side of the moon, Mike Collins in spacecraft Columbia picked up the flashing light of Eagle far below. Much lighter weight by then, it maneuvered smartly, precisely. When Eagle was positioned properly, Columbia took over and completed join-up.
consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. What is man that thou art mindful of him?
After a perfect return flight, Columbia landed on schedule in the Pacific. The 3 astronauts donned special protective clothing and masks to prevent spread of possible contamination from the moon. In the quarantine trailer aboard the USS Hornet, the 3 astronauts received the congratulations of the nation from President Nixon. Through live television via satellite, the whole world saw history's most famous men, as they always would be remembered. The door to space has been opened. It was a great effort accomplished by these men and hundreds of thousands of scientists, engineers, technicians, and support people in the space program. They made it possible to walk on the moon.